So now I'm just going to show you some really nice hip opener exercises that you can do on the floor on a mat. So we'll look to stretch out the front of our hips and also the glutes around the back of our hips. Again, the more time that we kind of spend sitting, these can get quite tight, so these are really nice ones to undo all of that tightness that comes from spending a lot of time in sitting. And the first one we're going to do, we're going to lie on our front. So have a little lie down on the mat. For those of you that have got the trunk control and the lower limb control to be able to do this, if you can keep your core quite active and keep your glutes switched on, that'll allow you to make sure that your hips stay grounded into the floor, and that will allow you to make sure that you can localise this stretch a lot more kind of to the hip flexors. For those of you that haven't got that control, that's absolutely fine, because simply just being in this position will kind of allow the stretch to the front of the hips anyway. So take your hands and you want to pop them kind of just kind of in front of the shoulders really, and I want you to just gently kind of draw the shoulders down the back. Again, not squeezing too tightly, don't draw them in really tightly, but it's just a gentle feeling of drawing the shoulder blades down the back and to open out through the front of the shoulders. And once you're in that position, pop your head on the mat so your forehead goes down on the mat, and from there, once your shoulders are in that nice position, you can just actively extend through the upper back. So again, it's an active movement, so you're kind of feeling that you're coming up into extension through the top of your back and not so much through the bottom of your back. So this is where, for the guys that can, keep the glutes switched on, keep the abs switched on quite nicely, and you can make sure that you localise that therefore then much more to the upper back. And again, it will stretch out through the hips, but it'll also kind of give a nice extension through the upper back, again undoing that position of being in sitting for a period of time. And you can kind of repeat that over and over. So again, return back down to the forehead on the floor, and then once you've been there for a few seconds, again just kind of gently press through your hands and just bring yourself up into extension. The other thing that's key with this one is not to lead too much with your head, so where you can keep the chin tucked so your kind of neck stays in a nice neutral posture, and again you can feel that more than through the upper back as opposed to through the neck and through the lower back. Now once you've done that a few times, you can progress that to kind of pushing up more passively through your hands, and again this will give you a nice stretch through the front of your hips. Those of you that can, keep those glutes switched on and try and feel as though you're trying to push the hip bones into the floor, and again you'll get much more of a hip flexor stretch by doing so. And again, those that can't, that's absolutely fine again, but just by being in this position you'll allow a nice stretch through the front of your hips. So the next one that we're going to move on to is again a nice one for opening out the hips. Play around with this one and kind of see what works for you, because it's quite a strong stretch around the hips, and it kind of depends on how much control you've got really. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up into this position here. So I've got a couple of pillows handy which will be quite useful, and if you can, try and take the hip that you're going to take forwards into a rotated position. So if you can bring the foot out in front of you, if you've got the range to do that, then great. If you haven't got the range to do that, that's absolutely fine. So the variation, if you have got the range to do so, is to kind of bring the hip out and the foot out in front of you and kind of try and sink your hips down into the floor with that position. Now if you can kind of get so far, but that's hard work, that's where your pillows come in handy. So prop them under your hip to allow you to rest and relax into that position, which makes it much more tolerable and allows you to hold that for a little bit longer. You can progress that if you want to by taking your hands forwards, so you can then rest your hands on the floor in front of you and kind of lower your head down as well. Now that will give a stronger stretch through the hip. If you could tolerate that, great. Again, if that's not tolerable or that's too uncomfortable, then you can keep yourself propped up with your hands in this position. And like I said before, if you haven't got the range in the hip to bring the foot out in front of you, that's fine, but take the foot back behind you so it's underneath you, and again instead pushing your hips down and pushing this hip down into the floor, and you'll still get a nice hip opener by doing that. And again, equally, if you wanted to take yourself forwards in that position, if that's more comfortable, you will get slightly more hip flexion from the hip that's in front of you, but again it's a nice one to open out through the back of the other hip. and trying to hold that one for 30 seconds to a minute if possible. Again, it can be a little bit uncomfortable, so just as much as you can tolerate, and again using pillows and things to help yourself do that can be quite helpful.